Good evening, Rabbi Eisenberg. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. That was a bit exciting there.
Well, you weren't there at the Zumba, but yeah, that was a bit exciting.
You recovered from that.
Me, do I look like I've recovered from it? I didn't even break a sweat.
That's what I expect. When it's frumba, I expect the rabbi to do it better than anybody else.
That's what it is. I wonder if anybody here actually, I just a shout out, if anybody here who's watching tonight actually went on the Zumba. So let us know how you thought it went. My wife said she was getting good feedback, but if anybody here is watching, Sharon's usually on or some of the others, let us know if you enjoyed it.
Anyway, a big mazel tov to Esty and the entire Eisenberg family on this occasion. It's quite a milestone.
It is. It's weird to think that I have and now 2/3 of my kids are adults already, or at least halachically adults.
So hang on. So working this out, then Esty was born in and around sort of Pesach time.
Yes, she was born 10 days before Pesach.
Okay, so that really puts the household under some pressure before Pesach, right?
It does, but on the other hand, if you're sort of bit forward thinking, so we managed. So we did something very strange at the time. We half cashiered our house. Oh, great! There we go. Clive Mosbaki says Ruth said it was great fun. Thank you. Thanks for that, Clive. We cashiered our kitchen. We did a whole bunch of cooking. We went back to uncashering our kitchen. We only cashiered a section of the kitchen. We did a lot of cooking, stuck it all in the freezer. Then we went back to regular, and then we went back again to Pesach. So it's a little bit weird way of doing things, but you know what? It works.
Talking of weird ways of doing things, obviously, last year.
What a segue!
What a segue! Did you see? It was seamless. That
was literally seamless. I couldn't have done it any better.
So last year was a very, very different Yom Tov that we had, very different Pesach, and it was different because I think it was the first proper Yom Tov that we'd all experienced collectively. And also traditionally a Yom Tov where, regardless of where you are on the planet, every family tries to come together for Seder night. It is it's one of the focal points of the year, and yet last year it was impossible. We were just I think we'd just been put down into deep freeze by the government at that point, and so we had to cope in extremely different circumstances. A lot of us got to experience their first sort of Zoom Sedorim as well. A lot of people started earlier and had some sort of element where they were sharing with family across the globe. I know we did here. And I have to tell you something, and I say this not too loudly, it was my favorite Pesach Seder ever, honestly, because we got to join up with some people that we would never normally see, and we really got to sort of to connect. And yeah, it was an odd. And after that, obviously, you carry on with your own Seder, and it's an odd circumstance to be in, but it's something that we are unfortunately going to experience again this year, because that still will be quite different, won't it?
Well, partially, I would say. I mean, if you're very, outdoors oriented, and if the weather's not like what it was today, from the second day Pesach, the 29th, you could actually get two households together outdoors, I think, legally. So if you want to do part of the Seder outdoors with neighbors or with family, et cetera, there you go. You might be able to do that at least.
That sounds exciting. It sounds very daring as well.
You sound riveted, don't you?
Well, no, I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking. I've got some good neighbors here, as you know, who are members of ours. I could invite them. That would be a way of doing it.
So it's either 6 people or 2 households. So
yeah,
you can choose your way you want to do it.
So what was your Seder like last year, Rabbi?
So it was interesting. I would say our Seder wasn't massively different, but I do know every time I think of Seder, thanks, Rob. Every time I think of Seder, one of the things I think of really is my mother-in-law. Because my mother-in-law basically said to us, she spoke to us at the time, and she said, "Look, I'm family. Come on, let me in."
Yeah.
And it was, it was one of the hardest things we had to do. But at the time, especially during last year, during like March, April, etc. Yeah, there you go, Chava. Actually, it's not the second night. It's from the second day onwards. I made a mistake. It's from the 29th. So I'll just I'll correct myself. It's only from the second day. The Tuesday you can't do, but from the second day onwards, you could actually eat together with friends and family in the garden if that works for you. But I remember my mother-in-law saying to me, "How could it be that that I'm not going to be with you for Seder?" And I said to her, I said, "Look, this is not personal. Please don't take it personally. We'd rather, as was said many times, around the non-Jewish festive season. Boris said it a few times. Others said it. We'd rather have you around now. We'd rather not have." Well, he said at the time, "You miss one Christmas with your family, but hopefully in order so that you can spend many, many more Christmases with your family." And we felt the same way. Yes, you're not with us at the Seder, and we were extremely upset about my mother-in-law not being with us for the Sederim. And what it meant really was that she was all by herself. And some people said literally, my mother-in-law told me that she sat the entire night, she cried, and then it took 45 minutes and she went to bed. Literally. That's what the Seder looked like. And I'm sure that I'm not mentioning my mother-in-law as sort of an aberration. I can imagine there were many, many people that experienced similar. Do you not think so?
I think there'll be loads of people that experience similar, and I think that was it's one of the hardest things. Imagine not being able to hear your grandchild say the Manish Tana. I mean, it's it's one of those things that you have to do. It's one of those things that you look forward to. Absolutely. And these are things that unfortunately you can't in the regular circumstances televise them or have them all recorded so it works seamlessly. So I think it has been very challenging, very difficult for people.
I mean, the good thing is this year they have the concept of bubbles, which they didn't have at the time. I think if we would have had the concept of bubbles at the time, certainly we would have had my mother-in-law over. There's no question. And my mother-in-law is part of our bubble now. She's over once, maybe twice a day, every single day.
Yeah.
Not Shabbos. But she comes over quite a bit, and it's fully legal and it's fully compliant. And that's the first thing. As soon as they came out with a bubble, we called up my mother-in-law. We said, "Look, come over. The bubble, it's now legal. Yes, you can do it. You can come over." But at the time, I remember feeling that, what should we do? You have her, and you could risk. I felt that we were risking my mother-in-law's life by having her. On the other hand, not having her also, it literally really broke her. It was really, really difficult.
We have some comments here. Chava said, "Thank goodness for Yekish education. She can run the Seder." I'm sure Chava's capable of running. She could run anything, given a bit of a run up at it. Here's Clive Moss Barkley. Some people are planning to hold only one Seder this year, as in Israel. Have you heard of that?
I've not heard of it, but it's probably just an extension of only one day Rosh Hashanah. So there used to be, again, this is a horrible term, but it used to be the term of 3-day Jews, which has morphed for many people into 2 days, because second day Rosh Hashanah is just a rerun of the first day. So why would I go twice? So it's so if people are only keeping one Seder instead of in Tuesday, I mean, again, people don't ask me my opinion. They just do what they think and what they feel is right. So if you say so, Clive, I'm sure that's probably the way it is. But again, lots of things happen in this community without people asking me for my advice. So I'll just take it on the chin and go, oh well, fine. People are making only one Seder, so make only one Seder. On the other hand, if you're all by yourself, I can understand that it's a very, very challenging, difficult thing to be going through to be Seder on your own. And to go through it twice, 2 nights in a row, must be really, really depressing.
And it's I think very difficult for people. Maybe I can ask you. Last year we were in shock. So I believe we went into Pesach almost sleepwalking. No one knew what hit them at that stage. We were still reeling. We didn't know how long we were going to be in lockdown for. I don't think anybody dreamt that we'd still be talking about homeschooling, lockdown, and so on all this time later in the year. And certainly in many ways, the Pesach story any year is full of wonderful. If you weren't a believer, you'd take them as fairy tales. It's the most fantastic tapestry of miracles and open miracles, with splitting of the sea. There's blood, there's frogs, there's darkness, there's all kinds of
Lots of great
plagues.
stuff.
It's amazing. I mean, just to try.
Somebody will make a movie like about the Ten Commandments or something like that.
maybe if they had a man like Cecil B. DeMille, he would have made something like that. But I mean, that obviously
would be a good guy.
Charlton Heston would be an ideal lead. But of its time, that film was a massive Hollywood blockbuster, and the reason is it doesn't get much better than the Pesach story. If you wanted to put on film some fantastic scenes in terms of how these plagues manifest themselves, and how it's a very almost interactive story. There's cause and effect. Paro does something, Hashem does something else. It's almost like a chess game. It's very exciting, that entire sort of story. But it always felt like it was a million miles away from reality, because back here in the real world, we didn't have such thing as plagues, and it was hard to believe that there could be some sort of a disease that would suddenly start to wipe people out overnight. Your belief in these things are tested. But this year, the belief in that particular aspect of it's quite easy, because we've seen it unfold before our eyes.
I think that's an interesting point. I've never really put it like that, but I think it's true that people have experienced the plague. We have actually experienced something that's a plague. And again, I think there are bits about the plagues in Egypt that are a lot more wondrous than about the plague that we have over here, especially because there was a differentiation made within the plagues in Egypt. So it wasn't only that God made a plague, but you could see evidently that the plague actually affected the Egyptians and didn't affect the Jews. Whereas sadly with Corona, we've not been impervious to the effects of Corona. Far from it. Not at all. I mean, we've lost lots of members, and as have many other communities, as has the religious community, we've all lost people to COVID. So to say, but on the other hand, and it's interesting to sort of almost compare them. I find that Corona has gone on for much longer. It is a much, much longer plague than the plague. On the other hand, I don't know if it was almost as devastating as, the effect of the devastation was sort of, I think, cumulative. So you look over an entire year and you say, look, over 120,000 people, 140,000 people have died. It's a huge amount of people. We can never downplay it, right? But it sort of it's been a slow climb, and at times it's going down, it's going up. Whereas the plagues in Egypt were 7 days of havoc, but then it was over. So it does have some sort of aspects that make it a little bit more dangerous, some aspects that make it a little bit more like it, less like it. But it is it's interesting to think about the idea that, experiencing a plague. I think that's one of the things that I often think about, or often speak about when I speak about these things, is that the plagues have actually enabled us, or this plague has actually enabled us to come to terms, or to start believing that there is such a thing as God turning the world upside down with an invisible force. This is an invisible force. None of us can see what's going on. None of us know what's going on, yet it's still happening.
And even in this modern day and age, where we have the advancement of medical science and everything that we know about plagues and diseases and how to treat them, if you see the panic which it struck the world in that first instance, in that run-up, January to March of last year, and how quickly this plague gathered pace, you suddenly do start to believe that actually, as much as we know, we're sometimes absolutely powerless to these devastating effects.
Oh, absolutely.
And in that respect, it's awesome. You are literally awestruck at the power of those sort of world events, and the fact that they can change so quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean, I remember I remember I once listened, it was interesting. It's 6 months down the line. Sometimes I sort of like re-listen to what I said. I gave a share. We had already shut down our shul. The government hadn't shut down shuls yet. And a day later, after we had shut down shul by us, I gave a share. I gave it to a whole bunch of boys from Mir that had come back for a Pesach.
Yeah.
This was an Old Torah. This was before social distancing was introduced, before all these things were introduced. And I was giving a share to them. And I remember listening to it 6 months later. And I remember saying to them, I said, imagine if all shuls shut down. Imagine if suddenly tomorrow your shul shut down and every shul around the world shut down and suddenly you're stuck and you don't do anything. And the UK went into it very, very slowly. So, I mean, a lot of people have a bit of a gripe against Boris about this, that we went into it slowly.
How quickly?
Well, first we said, well, we're not gonna ruin our way of life. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. Maybe we'll make some more adjustments. So we're like, oh shoot, we got to shut the whole thing down. Yeah, it felt like that. Whereas in Israel, they just went boom, clamped down. And when you watched how different countries did it, and it was very strange to see this. I mean, in Israel, it was really sudden. We were in Israel a few weeks before that. My nephew got married in the beginning of February last year.
Yeah.
I remember my father told me, he says, I went to see this one, I went to see that one. He went around the whole world. He went to see, he saw us there, and he went to America, and he saw everybody, and he came back home. And a day after he came back home, or 2 days after he came back home, he said the whole world shut down, and he's not seen any of his grandchildren in the last year. Right? He says it was just literally to the day. I saw everybody, I made it home, everything shut down. And literally after Purim, suddenly the world just went like that. Like somebody had flicked the switch. Yeah. And one country after the next just capitulated, they all just shut down.
So in some ways it makes us believe in this day and age that something like that it's not a dream. It's entirely possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I had a conversation early on with Clive Moss-Barkley. I know he's on the because he's made some comments. And Clive actually said it'd be interesting for Clive to to type in a bit of that. That for a long time he was part of pandemic planning in the NHS, and the NHS actually had a department that was planning for this thing. They said once every 100 years there is something like a pandemic. And they were planning for many years what they should do and how it would work and how they would get their way out, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago, the NHS, due to lack of budget, said, why are we spending money on this? This is ridiculous. We don't need to be spending money on this. And they shut down that department. And then when it happened, Clive's like, well, I've seen the figures before. I've seen the numbers before. I've seen exactly all the different modeling and everything. And suddenly, he said to me, oh, you're in this for 2 to 3 years. And I'm like, come on, it's not going to be 2 to 3 years. But here you go. We're a year down the line. Hopefully things, we don't know when this is going to be over, do we?
Not officially, no. And I think more importantly, without wishing to sound pessimistic, because one of the things that I can predict in the short term, and I think mostly everybody would agree with this, is that coming out of the pandemic, so around June time, you're going to have this wave of euphoria. There's going to be a good feeling within the UK as everybody rushes and scrambles to book things like holidays, to plan their lives ahead, to see their family again. And I think as we slowly start to work out what is normal, or what is the new normal, as most people are going to look at it, and how we move forward. So, for instance, in terms of face masks, they're going to be a feature of life, I would imagine, for quite some time to come. Even with the vaccines, but we're going to have to wait to see the way that plays out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I know in America, what's the name, Fauci, however you pronounce his name, they're talking about double face masks over there. Even have you heard that in America? They're talking about wearing one on top of the other.
I've not heard that, but I don't know whether they have had a massive issue over there because they didn't clamp down quick enough at all in terms of how also the power is devolved to different states to make up their decisions as regards what they keep open and what they shut. So over there, they've had an unimaginable, if I would have told you that America would have been hardest hit out of all the nations in terms of numbers, you would have said, how could that be? They're such a modern progressive.
And they're not the biggest nation either. I mean, you got China, you got India. They got 3 times the population, 4 times the population of America. You know what I mean?
And I, in a word, it's democracy. And the fact that you can, no, but that's it. It's the fact that you can make a decision that is different and try and defend that point of view. And that's very much the battle that you've seen there. There's a massive political battle anyway, and it's all entrenched. The feelings about the pandemic, together with your feelings about government and left wing and right wing, over there, it's so politicized that it's one and the same argument. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. But forgetting about that, I think it's interesting to think about what will happen with masks. Who knows? I'm sure there are certain people that are just waiting to get rid of them. There are other people that are going to say, you know, just because the 21st of June has come about and hopefully by that point, all of the different restrictions go away, doesn't mean we're going to give up on it. My guess would be, considering the way that the shul has been very, very cautious, I'm wondering if looking forward, the shul will still be very cautious, probably at least till Rosh Hashanah. What would you say, David?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Ian and I were discussing this the other night, and certainly Rosh Hashanah this year is something that all the shuls are going to be trying to sort of forward plan as much as possible. Last year went okay, but it also went okay because the volumes of people were manageable. And even staggering it the way that we did with different times and so on, it was manageable. You didn't have a mass population that were all descending at the same time. I think, you know, the challenge for shuls going forward, and we've spoken about this, and you spoke about it with the chief rabbi as well, is that, you know, trying to get those people back into shul in any kind of number in the future, that is the challenge. That's the challenge of trying to get them back in. But certainly in terms of restrictions, yes, I think it's something that we're going to be coping with for quite some time. So Clive Moss Barkley, when he was talking about 3 years of effects from a pandemic, I think he's right. You've got a year of peak effect, if you like, and then you're probably going to have 2 years whilst we play catch up and we deal with the aftermath of this thing.
I'm not even sure that he thought there would only be 1 year of peak. I think the fact that we have only 1 year of peak is really, you know, it's a tremendous miracle.
Well, let's talk about tremendous miracles, because that's kind of where we'd like to try and steer things, if at all possible.
Yeah,
we all know now the downsides of a pandemic, and we all know how deadly this disease can be, but also how deadly social isolation can be for people. And if Pesach is one of those times where we gather together collectively to all tell the same story all over the world, pretty much at the same time, on the same night, all around the globe, it's a tremendously powerful thing to be a part of, really. Telling that same collective history. But within that collective history, and the reason that we tell it, is this theme of hope, is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for everybody. But more than that, the way that this story is written and the way this story is told is very much, it's a heavenly salvation. This is God stepping in and saying, right, guys, we're going to take care of this. Follow me. And it really marks the start of the Jewish people as we know it today.
Definitely does. Yeah, but that's, you know, when you speak about miracles, that's I think where the Jewish people started off learning about miracles. You know, the Jewish people at the time in Egypt, they were idol worshippers. And then God said, look, I'm going to take these people out. I promised it to the forefathers. And then the miracles started happening one after the other. And then the Jewish people leave Egypt. And we today, as a nation, are only a nation because of what happened that time in Egypt. That's what really got us started. So that when we sit together on Pesach night, like you say, all around the world, really discussing, but almost reliving those miracles, I think, like you said, it gives us a new opportunity this year to really think about miracles. We can think about the miracles that God has given us with science. You know, some people actually serve science. You know, science has become their deity or their God. So as Jewish people, we don't serve science. We understand that there's something greater than science and God is greater than science. But that God has invested so much power and given science so much ability. We have, the fact that I can sit here in my office, talk to you sitting at home, to another, however many people there are online now, all around the country or maybe all around the globe, that science has given us that. That's the power that God has invested in science to be able to give to us. The fact that we in 9 months can come up, or however many months, it took only 9 months. By December, people were starting to get injections already.
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
In March, so that's 9 months. The fact that in 9 months we can try to find a way around this pandemic, and the fact that 4 months later, in March, we've already vaccinated well over 20 million people in this country. So that means we have produced 20 million vaccines just for this country. We have created the logistics to be able to manage it, and we have given out well over 20 million doses of this vaccine. So the fact that science has that kind of ability, we should see it. I see science as a miracle. I don't see science as a power in itself. But I think that science, if you see science through the eyes of a believer, science is God's way of creating so much that goes on in this world and giving us so many abilities.
I tell you, even if you were to see science through the eyes of a scientist, however skeptical they may be, the fact that we've been able to produce a vaccine and to distribute it, and not just one, there are many versions of a vaccine in different countries. It's been very widely reported. But to make the sort of progress that we've made to get a vaccine out there and to actually get it into the population, it's absolutely unheard of. Even in the realms of modern science, they were talking at the beginning of this that it was impossible. They kept saying impossible to get it out as quickly as this. But
they said 5 years, didn't they say 5 years?
They were managing our expectations very well because on the regular, it can take 20 years to develop these things sometimes, and to properly test it and to get it out there. So it is nothing short of a miracle.
Yeah. Although they probably threw everything at this. They must have stopped whatever it was, and they're just thrown. They're thrown in the kitchen sink. They're thrown in everything that they can into the pursuit of this. And I'm sure every single pharmaceutical company knew, if we get there first, this is a grail. This is a real grail towards a lot of cash. I think we can also agree that many of the pharmaceutical companies, they are in it for the money. There are businesses in the end of the day. Yes, their main business is healthcare, but they're still businesses, and they'll still put all the resources into where they have to in order to make the most money.
I agree, and that's a whole other subject on its own. We're going to have a look at some of the comments that have come in. Robert Nathan. Robert, there's a sense here that I think we've probably covered this aspect to death, particularly over the past couple of weeks. But I'm going to read it out anyway because I love you. Rabbi, you said at times the community doesn't listen. They still don't listen with reference to corona risk management.
I will agree with that, but I will say that I'm hearing now from people all around our community. That means the shrubberies, not the frum community. So the shrubberies, people are telling me now, where they're cutting corners as far as the Sedarim and things are coming up. So I think it's sort of, because we're coming to a point where everybody's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. I think a lot of people are feeling, I'm not going to go all out, but that I can do. Yeah.
I think there is definitely an emboldenment in terms of people's behavior once they've had the vaccine. They start to act and behave differently because mentally, they're in the back of their mind, even subconsciously, they feel they've already got a certain level of immunity to this thing, and they can start to take risks. Now, it's entirely up.
Israel. That didn't work so well in Israel. I think after Israel said half the country was vaccinated or something, and then suddenly the numbers went crazy. They spiked very, very badly. I think because people were emboldened because of that. Then sort of that immunity started to kick in. Now I think things are really opening up in Israel in a way.
Yeah, well, I think at the moment the main thing that robonim can do, as far as I'm aware, and again there's controversy surrounding this, is I think that the advising people that they should adhere to social distancing. I think a lot of people have heard that message and have made their decision by this point whether or not they're going to abide by it. I think that's fair to say. I'm not sure we're going to convert anybody at this stage to start believing differently, and I think it's naive to think any differently. But I think where robonim can put in effort is to continually talk about the advantages of having the vaccine, and to push people to have it. Last week we heard where Bales had encouraged people actively to go out and get the vaccine. And the chief rabbi certainly has gone on record as regards that, and many other community rabbonim as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If it helps anything, again, I don't think my opinion counts for anything because I'm not a scientist or a great rabbi. So, but I would say that, if you can get a vaccine, go and get a vaccine, unless you have some kind of, immune problem, then speak to your doctor. They will help you and tell you which one of the different vaccines you should get. But of course, everybody should go out and get a vaccine. I mean, why would you not go out and get a vaccine? It's just, it's so...
There's diverse opinions on that. Yes, look, to me, it's easy to sort of cast it aside as saying it's irresponsible. But some people have some very deep-seated feelings about this. I'm not sure the science behind those feelings is particularly grounded in reality, but that's what we see. Clive Moss Barkley says, humanity has been subject to plagues throughout our history. Nobody really thought it could happen again because medical science is so advanced. Big mistake. It's so true. Russell Cooper, good evening, Russell. I wonder if God's purpose in sending this plague is to make us all appreciate what is really important in this life, seeing our family, simple pleasures, walking, etc., the things that we all take for granted.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how true is that? I think
a lot of us have had to make paradigm shifts in our life of what's important, what's not important. People always says, I couldn't do X, Y, and Z. I'm too busy. I've got so much work. I can't do this. I can't do that. Well, just like that. I can't help my kids with homework. Kids constantly ask you, can you help me with the homework? I got a project. I got this. Well, God, you know what karma is? I just saw that somebody sent me I get screenshots. You ever see that one? Karma is the parents that skipped out on lesson now having to sit with their children and reset those lessons on the computer. Yeah.
Right.
But
very true. We've all found ourselves doing things this year that we wouldn't normally do, whichever way you look at it. And I think
when was the last time you did trigonometry, huh?
I can't even spell trigonometry, never mind.
And that's with an English major.
And when you were growing up, then you would always sort of say to your parents, well, why can't I just do this on a calculator? And they always used to tell you, well, you won't have a calculator with you all the time in life. But pretty much now, if we need anything, it's right there and in our hands. So I think it's a challenge seeing education through, I think, perhaps a modern perspective. Some of the things and some of the methods of teaching children these days is superb compared to what we had. I had to remember things, and then slowly over your adult life, you then spend time forgetting them again. But it's tremendous what they're doing.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I mean, but people thought they didn't have time, and now suddenly they're sitting at home and they're doing all these things with their kids. And then when you said, I don't have time and I have to do this and I have to do that, and God just changed your whole schedule around from one day to the next. So something's like, well, you didn't think you had time. Now you're on furlough. You got plenty of time. Yeah. All these kind of things. I find it very, to me, that's one of the greatest, as Russell said, it's one of the greatest lessons that we have. It's something making us appreciate what's really important in this life. And people spend so much time on the things that are unimportant. And I think this year we've had to whittle away at a lot of the unimportant things to be left what's really important. That's all you can hold on to, because you can't hold on to everything now during the pandemic.
Absolutely not. And people have had to make compromises and very difficult decisions. What do we keep and what don't you? That's when
you figure out what's most important, when you got to make those compromises. That's where it happens.
Correct. Chava Erlanger is on message as well. I think Seder night is really about hope and emunah, and knowing that there is always a hope when things seem hopeless and when there is good. I think this year has taught me that we can't plan and we need to trust God. There is no greater story of salvation is there really than the Pesach story?
No, I don't think there is a greater story of salvation. I think because the salvation was so miraculous, that's what makes it such a great story of salvation. There are many great stories of salvation throughout history, but not the way the Pesach story comes up. And I think, as Chama says, the Seder night really is partially about that emunah in God and knowing that from 1 second to the next, everything can change. The day before Moshe Rabbeinu came on the scene, people were like, this is never going to end. And then Moshe Rabbeinu comes on the scene and he says, all right, I'm going to get you out. And people had hope. And then it goes wrong and they're like, oh, we thought it was going to work and it didn't work. But then Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly changes everything around and hope really, right, springs eternal, as they say. It's just suddenly that hope becomes real. And suddenly people realize, hey, wait a second, this is real. We are going to get out of there. And then they got out. But part of getting out, and those people that really were able to get out were those people that were willing to say, A, I want out, and B, I believe God can take me out, and there's something better out there. And for those people that said, look, we don't want out, we actually quite happy, we want to stay. God said, you want to stay, you can stay.
And I think it's probably correct that we should tell this story. I'm going to read one of the comments here, but Sharon Hood said, top immunologists in Israel say that even after both vaccines, people should still follow the face space rules, etc. That is to say that we cannot just walk out this pandemic feeling that we've survived it and that we are absolutely immune to everything going forward. We should not live our life with such abandon. And there's a parallel really even in what happened after all of these miracles and after we were taken out of Egypt. If you were to fast forward, you very quickly hit the story of the Egel Azav.
Yeah.
And that people suddenly took everything for granted, all these open miracles that they'd lived through, all these fantastic salvations that they lived through, and it was gone. To survive that, to witness that firsthand, and then to ignore that almost, it shows as human beings how we have to be careful now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, within Machshava, so within Jewish thought, a lot of its time is spent on that point because we say, look, you can eat. I don't know how many times you've had this. Have you ever had have you been very, I don't know, fired up, or you've been really sort of, you've gotten this feeling that you've really been inspired to do something different, and by 2 days later it's out the window? I've had
all the time, every January.
I've been inspired. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to work out 3, 4, 5 times a week, and then you walk out the next morning and it's pouring. You're like, I'll start tomorrow, and then the day after the weather's still not good. About 3 days later, you're like, you know what? It's not so important, so I won't exercise for the rest of my life, right? Or you want to do a diet and you try it for 1 week and it works well, and then you try it the second week and it still works, and then the third week you don't lose any weight, and the fourth week you don't lose any weight. You're like, who needs to diet? It doesn't work anyway. All these people make it up. It doesn't make a difference. Whatever I eat, I always gain weight. However much I run, I'll always gain weight. It doesn't work. And in life, inspiration is not something that lasts unless you create some kind of system for the inspiration to last with you. So that the Jewish people had this tremendous amount of inspiration that they gained from the Seder. However, at the same time, it was given to them and served to them on a platter. They didn't have to do anything for that inspiration. God sent one makkah and another plague until they got out. And then a few weeks later, not even so long, only 3 months later, and they're ready to serve the golden calf. Which means that inspiration on its own is not good enough. And that's really what Sharon's mentioning as well. So what? So we went through Corona, and then we got a vaccine. As you said already, David, people feel emboldened.
Yeah, completely.
You forget very quickly the fact that 6 months ago we were very, very careful.
Certainly. I mean, reading this comment here, Robert says vigilance when walking, but it's funny.
But I don't see anywhere.
I don't see that anywhere, and I see
that.
I tell you what I do see. I see a whole load of people within that sort of age group. I'm sorry to do that to you, Robert, but I'm classifying you in our more mature section. But with that, you see them walking with a new spring in their step. It's almost like they've been given, release from that. They are, whether you like it or not, there are signs that people are starting to really relax with this thing a little bit more. But maybe we have to keep one eye open.
That's true. But when
I've upset my Tuesday group crowd.
Well, you didn't say that about Sharon.
No, I didn't. I just, you know what? Robert is just one of these people who I can look to as a senior voice of advice. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Moving swiftly.
If you've been into Heaton Park, I've been to Heaton Park a few times. I find you look around Heaton Park, it's people. Everybody's all over the place. Everybody's really. I mean, I find there's almost no social distancing as people walking through Heaton Park. Do you not find that?
Correct. I think it's much more open. I think that people, once they're outside anyway, feel that they can act in a much more relaxed manner. In actual fact, Robert's clarified, and this is a very good point, in reference to women walking alone in view of recent events. It's probably worth mentioning that it's not just recent events.
What's he talking about?
So in the papers, there's been this story basically that has taken much of the headlines over the last week. Is a story of a young lady who's walking home,
lady, yes.
and unfortunately, they're now starting to piece together her final moments. And really, we should always be ever vigilant. There is no point in time where the threat is higher or lower. I really feel that threat is ever present. And perhaps in view of the way that I've been accused of babying my children, I don't let them walk anywhere on their own at all, in the way that my parents might have done at their age. But we need to be more careful. This world is not necessarily a friendly place all the time. Rabbi, let's talk more about inspiration, if you don't mind. Clive is asking a good question. What can you say to people who will be alone for a second Pesach? So the idea is that in some way the story of Pesach is meant to give us renewed hope, and it's meant to give us a bit of an uplifting feeling. Well, what can you say to people to inspire them?
So I really struggle with that. I must tell you. Everybody struggles with certain things. It's hard for me many times to try to give word or to give voice to something that I myself am not experiencing. And I feel I remember last year, I was asked by an organization of single parents, divorced men and women that get together for inspiration for each other, if I could speak to them. And I said to the lady that asked me, I said, I just feel I'd be patronizing you guys, because Baruch Hashem, I am married, and Baruch Hashem, I have my kids, and Baruch Hashem, things are stable by me, and I know they're not by you. So for me to come out and to say to you people, you have to be strong, and it's only a test from God, and it's a difficulty, but you can get through it. It sounds so patronizing, doesn't it? Do you not find sometimes if you're not really in this situation and you're telling people, I've often said to people, people I've spoken to people about rabbinics, and one of the things that I say to people, if you're speaking, let's say, you're speaking to a childless couple, you're speaking to someone that's lost a spouse, and you say something like, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. No, you don't. You don't know what somebody else is going through. First of all, I've not lived through a lot of these tragedies. And even if I have lived through some of the tragedies, I still might have coped with them differently than somebody else does.
But that's the difference, isn't it, between sympathy and empathy? I think sympathy, you feel sympathetic feelings for somebody because you yourself have been through those things before. And empathy is the ability to share, to express the fact that you do, or that you're attempting to understand what the other person's going through, even though you yourself might not be experiencing it. And so I think as human beings and as a rabbi, that must be a tremendous balance to have to strike between sympathy and empathy. There must be plenty of situations where you are faced with something that you have no living knowledge of. And so there's your challenge.
There's a challenge, and I guess you work with the empathy as it is. So now Clive is saying, what do you say to people who be alone for a second Pesach? I don't know. I would say one of many things that people said, well, it's so difficult. It's yes, it's only, we're coming out on the other side, and soon we'll be able to be together again. But all these things that you say, for a lot of people, it doesn't really make them feel better. They're still going to be alone for Pesach. They're still going to be lonely for Pesach, and they're still going to really struggle with this Pesach. And for me to say, we're getting to the end of it, when people feel, I'd like to be at the end of it already. A lot of people say, if we were at the end of this, I could go to my neighbor and I could spend Seder with them. Now that I don't have that, I don't have anyone to go to. So I would say, good evening, Adam Patrick. There we go. In London. Yeah.
In London.
Here's London.
He's gone international. Deborah Fraser's cutting in here, but she's saying it is hard, but you can express how difficult it will be for them. Well, obviously that's
yeah. But even then, I can say, I cannot say that I know for sure how difficult it is for them. I can express that it must be very difficult for you, and it is very difficult. Again, as I said, I saw firsthand how I saw firsthand. We're both having a laugh about that last one.
Well, there's such a thing as a loaded comment, and this is one of them. Get a good book and have an early night. I guess
I would say to the person, look, if I were you, I'd have 4 cups of wine. By the end of it, you'll be singing, and then you go to sleep. It'll be great.
Well, let's look at the Seder then briefly in terms of, because it's you were right with what you said before. We have a framework in which to work within when it comes to celebrating Pesach. We have a very fixed timeline and a framework that we work from all night. That Haggadah, regardless of whether you are Orthodox, whether you're middle of the road, you're Reform, whoever it is, the Haggadah takes the same form. We start with in more or less, but
I've seen a Reform Haggadah they've gone out.
Give me a couple of inches there, okay? Throw a bone to our Reform brethren.
All right,
okay?
here you go.
All right, there you go. It's Pesach. There we go. But largely, because it tells the same story, it has to follow the same sort of procedures, and we go through explaining why we do. There's a lot of symbolism there on that table, from the way that the Seder plate is laid out, from the which of the different matzahs we take from and we break from, and what we hide and what we eat and what we do. There's a tremendous ritualized system there that has been well honed over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And so we have a framework to work from. So somebody who is alone at home and celebrating Pesach on their own without family for the second time this year, they have a framework to work from. But what within that framework would you consider them concentrating on as being worthwhile?
So I think you can concentrate. It's really what you think does it for you that will help you concentrate on certain things. For different people, it's different parts of the Seder that really speak to them. For some of them will be the Magid, for some will be the Hallel, for some it's eating the matzah or having the maror, But I think we can. One of the things you can focus on is I would focus on the maror and the bitterness, and take your bitterness and put it together with the bitterness of the Jewish people, and say, you know what, it's a bitter night, but it's been a bitter night for many, many people. It has been for many, many years. It's been bitter. And why I would also say that, whilst, again, this is maybe not understanding people properly, but whilst it is bitter for many people to be on their own, there are people out there that suffered so much more. You think about the Seder in Auschwitz. The Seder in Auschwitz was probably a lot more difficult than people who are sitting at home today in Broughton Park or in Prestwich or in Whitefield and feel like, I'm isolated. It's very difficult. I feel I should be together with one. True, once a year. Robert Warner, if you want to have an egg and salt water, I can invite you to my house for one. If it's a once a year opportunity, you need to get out a little bit more. Yeah. But I think you can on the one hand feel the bitterness and take your bitterness and put it together with everybody else's bitterness. But the way I would see it this year would be the following: that last year I felt the Seder really we were going into an abyss, and we didn't know. We were going into a tunnel. We didn't know if there was an end, where there was the end, where the light is. I feel this year the Seder is the other way around. We're sort of starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel between last year and this year, we've come through a bit of we've been through a bit of a metamorphosis, but we've also been through a bit of a sort of a downward curve, but now we're back on the upward. I do believe we're on the up. And I think if people realize, yes, this Seder is going to be difficult. Of course it's going to be difficult. And sitting by yourself is difficult, and it's bitter, and it's going to be hard. And maybe don't stretch it out. The longer you make it last, the more depressing it gets. But I really believe a lot of things like this are down to attitude. So you speak to certain people. I've made many phone calls over the last year. Some people we speak to, and they say to me, like, Rabbi, we make the best of it. We go out, we go for walks. Yes, our children and our grandchildren can't come to visit us, but we'll be out of it soon and it'll be great. And some people say to Rabbi, it's been 6 months already. I can't bear it anymore. I can't handle it. So a lot of it is down to attitude as well. And I think if we can try to have a better attitude and we can try to really look at this and see it as, yes, it's the Seder on the way. Last year was the Seder on the way down. And this year feels like the Seder on the way up, even if it's on your own. I think if you feel it as a Seder on your way up, as opposed to still being down, I think that gives hope to people in looking through it.
Great question here from Deborah Fraser. Is there a good commentary on the Haggadah? Is there one that you recommend? There are loads of them, but is there one that you recommend more than another?
I don't like making recommendations, and I'll tell you why that is. I find in general that different people and different commentaries speak to different people. I've had people show me stuff and say, read this. This is just the most brilliant commentary you'll ever read. And I read it and I'm like, yeah. And they're like, don't you think it's amazing? I'm like, no, it's actually very patronizing. They're like, no, it's not patronizing. It's amazing. Or it's very, and some things are too deep and some things, it really depends. I mean, if you really want to, Deborah, you can call me up and we can discuss. If you want to tell me exactly what sort of line you'd like to take. So there are some that are more filled with stories. There are some that are more philosophical. There are some that are more explanatory. Different commentaries do different things. And that's their sort of modus operandi within commentating. So there are many good commentaries on the Haggadah. And what I would say is when you find the right one, that's the one that speaks to you because it sort of explains the story the way you want it to. That's the one you should hold on to. That's the one you should use.
I've relied on it's not a particularly detailed Haggadah in terms of telling you what you should do and how you should do it. There are better sources for that. But Elie Wiesel's Haggadah obviously has lots and lots relating to that period of time and the Holocaust and how Pesach maybe was celebrated back then as well. And to me, it kind of puts things in perspective. So that's one that I personally.
So for some people that speaks to, I think people who like to take the Exodus and then compare it with the Holocaust, because it is the most recent tragedy that our nation has gone through. And almost everybody who's watching this tonight will know at least one survivor, at least one. So it becomes something that you can actually tangibly feel as part of you, as opposed to something that's just very, very esoteric.
It's more than just that. We always say with reference to the Holocaust that people should never forget. And Pesach is the number one act, I think, in all of our Jewish calendar and everything that we do in the year. It's the number one thing that we do to remember. It's an active remembrance. We sit through and we go through that Seder every year, the same thing. But we do it every year, the same thing, to drum into kids and into the next generation how important it is to keep telling the story. And if it was so important to tell the story of something that happened many, many lifetimes ago in a world that has no semblance to reality of our modern reality, how the more so does it become important to still continue telling that story of the Holocaust within the same context almost?
Yeah, so I will tell you, it's interesting. My wife's grandfather, who went through the war, had a story that he used to tell. And he actually, I don't know, I think it's my mother-in-law who has the Haggadah. I don't think my wife has the Haggadah, but I think my mother-in-law has the Haggadah. In the back of the Haggadah, my wife's grandfather wrote the story of how he was saved and how he, there was a truck and he jumped out, it went over a cliff and he jumped down and there was a tree just there and he hung onto the tree and everybody else fell to their death. And every year at Seder night, at a certain point within the Haggadah, he would say, and now I will tell you my personal story of salvation. And so therefore that the Seder was not only about national salvation, but it really is very much about personal salvation as well. And I think as we are going through Corona and we feel this idea of personal salvation, everybody has a story of personal salvation to tell. So whether it's, whether you read, if you hear a story like we heard last
I think Adam's, if I'm not mistaken, Adam became an uncle again at some point.
Adam became an uncle again. Mazel tov, Adam.
I think so.
Mazel
There we
tov.
go. We have some other comments as well, which I'm going to bring up. So Chava Erlanger, it is more difficult. I think she's referring to spending the Sedorim alone. It's more difficult than you can imagine. I've made a decision the whole year to have a Yom Tov Shabbos as normal, although I have to, if it is extremely difficult not to have my boys home for a second Pesach. It must be unbearably difficult for people, and that is for sure. But at the same time, she takes the message of one of the central messages of the Haggadah and of the Seder, V'hisha Omda, and that's what gives her so much hope. It doesn't get
generation. There have been many generations like this where, I mean, we are spoiled in a way. I know in the olden days when people used to travel, used to go away, and you could go away for 2-3 years at a time and not see your family for 2-3 years. And it's not like you had Zoom. It's not like you had mobile phones or telephone calls or WhatsApp or Facebook or FaceTime or whatever. It's just you went away and you were away for years at a time. So V'hi Shamda tells us that, things have gone through. V'hi Shamda is a very, very interesting one because you look at history and see how history repeats itself and how history unfolds. And you can look back at what history and that it's happened again and again. At the end of the day, God's always there somehow to help us out. We'll find a way out of this. We will find a way out. And yes, we've had enough plagues for 1 year, but God says we're not finished yet, but we're definitely finding our way out. I do feel we are on the way finding our way out.
A few practical questions here. One from Robert Nathan. Why do we recite parts of Shacharis at the evening Seder?
Is he talking about Nishmas?
Well, he could be talking about, could also be talking about Halal. He could be talking about...
Yes, I'm not sure. It depends. The answer will depend on which piece specifically you're asking about. But a lot of the pieces are about, thanking God. So, Hodol Hashem Kitav Kilam Chazda, Hodol Elokei Elokim. There's that's known as the Halal Gadol. That's when you say Kilalam Chasdo. And then Nishmas is sort of like, that's really, it's a beautiful song. Anybody who's never taken the time to come on time to Shacharis, now is your time at the Seder maybe, or before the Seder to have a look at it. Nishmas Kol Chai, when you sing about everybody sings to God, the soul of every living thing. And we say, if our mouth was full of song like the river, and our tongue could say praise to God like the amount of waves, etc. So you go through it. We can never, ever get to the point of thanking God enough. From one of the thousands and tens of thousands and myriads of different things that God's done for us as God done for our forefathers. So, that's part of the Seder, because when you get to the end of the Seder, part of it is to feel that elation that God has taken us out of Egypt. And that's why we recite those parts of Shacharis.
Bev Voss, good evening. Bev, how you doing? My family's attitude is we have waited this long, the end is in sight. There's something in that kind of stoic, kind of just going to see it through to the end. But a bit of patience, because the end is in sight, and it'd be a shame for people to ruin things this early on.
And I think people should take that attitude, but for some people, it's really, really hard to have that attitude. They're just so lonely, it doesn't help.
Laura Greenberg's making some recommendations here. Deborah Fraser, have you looked at the current Tanakh of the land of Israel Exodus? It's very interesting. The rabbi is right, though. He is right. Okay, Sharon Hood also adds that Rabbi Twersky has some very interesting commentary relating to his work in therapy. Again, Mazel Tov to the entire Patrick family. Robert Werner, I think that was the message that we told ourselves last year, to be thankful and to be hopeful. And I guess this year we must add to that we must be patient as well, and that we need to add to that feeling of gratefulness and that message of hope, the message that it will get there in the end. We just need to keep it all together for a little bit longer, and the end is very much in sight. And then there'll be new challenges in life. There always is.
I think that's the important thing to remember. It goes back to the comment that Clive made before, is that just because we beat Corona doesn't mean we won't have other challenges in life. I think life will always be full of challenges, maybe not as difficult as Corona, but yeah, we will always have challenges. And I think it's what makes life interesting. Life without challenges wouldn't, what would life be if it was only simple? What gives life spice really is the fact that there are challenges, that we have to go through certain things. And, everybody goes through them in the way they go through them. And, we have to try the best.
So as Laura says, it's such a miracle to have the vaccine. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that we're talking now that even I think they think that certainly by May, I think even the younger adult population will be vaccinated by that point.
Somebody said they've now upped the distribution. They'll be able to do up to 1 million people a day or something like that.
It's nothing short of miraculous, yeah. And a lot of mistakes have been made over the last year. But who knew that life was going to throw out such a difficult challenge, such as Corona? And I just want to say that I'm tremendously looking back over the last year. The people that I'm most proud of, it's all the people within our community and the people around us. The fact that they've managed to cope so well, and to still support. They still support their shul. They still support shul events. They still contribute to their community. They're still caring. They're still making sure that people are being looked after. It is amazing. It really is, and it's shown me a whole different side to people.
And I think that the other thing is, which I spoke about yesterday in my sermon, and we spoke about a little bit as well. It's amazing to see the adaptation that our shul has been able to have during this pandemic. We have adapted and adopted. I think that's the two things that is important. We've adapted to what life and adopted certain things, and they've become, very, very successful, very, very, and so much so that I've been hearing from different people from different shuls. Our shul just doesn't do anything like your shul does. You guys got this Sunday Night Live, and you got the Tuesday Tea, and you got all these events that Adi is putting on. Even tonight, we had so many people. We had over 40 computers together at this Zumba event for my daughter's Bas Mitzvah. And people said it was great. My wife said it was just the atmosphere was amazing. Yeah.
We're going to just cover one or two last minute bits of housekeeping before we let everybody go. But Robert's saying everyone is invited to Shrubs Tea at 2 next Tuesday. JNF UK celebrating their 120th year with Shrubs. That's set to be a very interesting afternoon. So please do join Robert. And if you haven't got the new Zoom code, get in touch. He'll give it to you.
Robert, maybe put it on over here in your next comment if you get a chance, then we can highlight it as well.
Fantastic. Chava says, when we say Shechianu on Seder night, really think of the meaning behind the bracha. Russell Cooper is.
Just say what Shechianu means. Shechianu actually means Shechianu. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Chalam Bres to you, God, the King of the world. Shechianu, who has kept us alive. The Kiyemonu, not just kept us alive, but kept us the way we are. The Gianu, who brought us Lasman Hazeh to this time. Last year, when you said Shechianu on the Seder night, there was no guarantee you were going to be saying Shechianu this year. Many of us were very, very worried. Many of us are still worried. But definitely last year, when we were really in the throes of the worst part of Corona, it was a very, very challenging time for all. And that you can stand and say Shechianu today, that God has kept us alive and allowed us to come to this year to the Seder again, it's a real blessing. So many people have passed away. So many people's lives have been lost. We're still here. That's a fantastic thing to be able to say.
It's unbelievable. Russell Cooper, the birth pains of the coming of Mashiach, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And Laura Greenberg's agreeing with you. Before we let everybody go, I just want to cover a topic which you will see in the papers, you may see over the next week. On the 21st, which is 1 week today, the national census is being done. Now, the UK national census doesn't get done very often. The last one was in 2011. And there is a propensity for faith communities, but particularly the Jewish faith community, due to persecution that they've experienced in their history, And in some cases, in very recent modern history, we are reluctant to sign any form or to tick any box that designates us as Jewish when being asked by the wider world what we are. And the reasons for that is that, you know, people are naturally hesitant about giving this. They feel that in the wrong hands, this information could be devastating. And if you want to take it in the context of what happened in Nazi Germany in terms of registration of Jewish people and so on, it has
everybody's name.
It has some very, very sinister connotations. However, it is important that we don't necessarily take that attitude to this to the census, because the results of the census provide the data that politicians and people that are involved in social planning use to make decisions about our communities going forward. So in terms of funding for our community, if the size of our community is not accurately gauged within the census, there's no guarantees that we're going to have the resources necessary to serve such a large amount of people. To give you an idea, on the last census, they reckoned 260,000 people said that they were Jewish, as opposed to the number should have been more like 300,000. Now, 40,000 people is a large amount of people, and if you've got a funding gap, that's one tremendous gap to try and get over. So the information that is gathered by the census is extremely important for people, and for the future of our community. So I believe wherever possible, there is a campaign encouraging people to tick or to state that they are Jewish on the census. It really does make a big deal of difference to our community and the future of our community, in terms of allowing us to accurately look after our communities going forward. Simply put, they can't look after us if they don't know about us. We need to go on the record. So that's our take on it. There are other people that have different views. We totally respect your right to choose to state whatever you are. But there we go.
I mean, when I was asked the question, and I think that's another thing, stand up and be counted. Don't hide behind. Somebody said to me, "Are you going to say that you're Jewish?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "What do you mean, why?" Because that describes me best. I would love to be able to say to everybody and anybody, "Are you Jewish?" Look them straight in the face and say, "Yes, I am." Right? Okay, there are two opportunities: staying religion and also ethnicity, and I did that also. Right? Here, by the way, are the as Russell said, contributing basic collection of our community. Here you have the Carmona Charitable Trust, the sort code and the account numbers on here. Absolutely. Right?
There's a mini discussion going on here. Robert Werner says there's two opportunities, stating religion and also ethnicity.
I put it in both cases.
Clive must
as white other and as Jew, because I'm not white British. I'm not from this country, but I'm white Jewish. End of story.
Clive Moss Barkley, what would you say? Would you say the same if Jeremy Corbyn was PM? Clive,
look at me. You can tell I'm Jewish. It's like, it's like the Hasidim who put on the P cap and think that they go incognito. Not going to help you.
I've already been on Sunday Night Live now. They know who I am, and now they know who Clive Moss Barkley is. We're on the record. But Clive, joking aside, yes, those are the kind of thoughts that some people will have. But I don't necessarily believe that the risks to us of giving up this information, I don't think they outweigh the risks of not being able to participate in communal life. And when I say communal life, I'm talking about the UK as opposed to just the Jewish community. But it's so important for funding and for planning and for all sorts of different things. It comes up time and time again. And, it's amazing how the census will show how Manchester has changed. So, for instance, did you know in the 2011 census, it would state that Manchester's Jewish community, and being very clear here where we say Manchester is, had shrunk. And so they were referring to the old Jewish community that used to live in what was a Manchester postcode, so M8 typically. So all of Crumpsall and all of Cheetham Hill had shrunk over the years. So by the time you got to 2011, it showed that our community had contracted. But if you look at Sedgley Park, it showed that it had grown. What this year's census will show, if it's accurately taken, is that for the first time in a long time, the tables have turned again. That not only is Sedgley Park one of the fastest growing Jewish communities outside of London, but the Manchester Jewish community is now the fastest growing Jewish community within Manchester, because you've got a massive growth of people moving back into Crumpsall, which if anybody...
House there, please speak to David Mintz. He's the
forget about housing. It is tremendous. It's a really feel-good story. It's
Moxley Road, that whole area, Cheetham Hill, behind Cheetham Hill.
It's a tremendous
3 to 5 days.
It's a tremendous thing that Manchester is filling out, and that the community feels brave enough and safe enough as well to push their boundaries, living in harmony, obviously, with their neighbours wherever they go. But it's something that's superb, but it can only be accurately gauged if we answer these questions accurately. So a little plea from us is to try and answer that as proudly and as accurately as you can. You have your right to privacy. That's entirely up to you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Not a good idea to put Shrub's password anyway. Okay, we're going to be changing the password pretty much every day from now onwards. It'll make it hard for people. Thank you very much for everybody tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in.
And I hope that Pesach this year is really more hopeful than last year. You were so right, Rabbi, when you said it. There was a thought in my head when we did our Seder last year, was whether or not we would have the same faces, even on a computer screen, but wherever we would see the same faces this year, because it wasn't a guarantee in March of last year. It absolutely wasn't. And so every single one of us that are still watching this and are still going to have a Seder this year, be it alone or with your families, you have already experienced a salvation from something which is truly miraculous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think I can summarize it better than that. I think on that note, I'm not even going to try to outdo that one this week.
I've spoken above my pay grade. Have a great week, everybody. We will catch up with you. Is there Sunday Night Live next week? What's next week?
Hope so.
I hope so, yeah.
I can tell you that in 2 weeks' time, there's no Sunday Night Live, Clive. That much I'll tell you.
We'll be coming live from our living room to our family. Okay, so yes, next week there will be a Sunday Night Live. Yes, there will be. Topic to be confirmed.
Please go on. Absolutely. And Robert, the Haredi community generally does answer the census. I think it's a legal obligation to answer it, so I think everybody does. You know, they're all law-abiding citizens.
And Brian Cohen saying, thank you for an interesting... And on those 3 exclamation marks, we must end the show. Good week. Have a good week, everybody. Take care.